Out an airstrike inside Syria for the first time in more than 5 years. But there are conflicting accounts of what was the target. Now, regional security sources quoted by the Reuters news agency say that Israeli aircraft attacked a convoy of trucks carrying weapons towards the border with Lebanon. The Syrian state news agency, however, says Israeli jets have bombed a scientific research centre in Jamriah on the outskirts of the capital, Damascus. Lebanon's military says Israeli jets flew into Syrian airspace 3 times. Well, in a statement carried by state media, they said the planes crossed into Syria below radar level just north of Mount Hermon and returned the same way. They say the attack destroyed the building, killing 2 workers and wounding 5 others.
What we know, according to the Syrian government, is that the target was a military scientific research center. They say as you said, 2 people were killed, 5 people were injured, and a lot of damage to the building. It happened in an area in the countryside of the capital, Damascus. Now, earlier reports from unofficial forces had indicated that the target was actually a convoy of trucks carrying weapons destined to go to Hezbollah here in Lebanon. But Hezbollah is not making any comments on this. They're not denying, they're not confirming. They're just, their TV and media outlets are treating this news line just like any other network. What we know is that the Israeli officials have warned before. They are concerned that the stockpile of weapons with the Syrian government could be in danger of falling in the hands of the enemies.
Well, for more on this, we're joined from Washington by Michael Eisenstadt. He's a former military analyst with the US government. Thanks very much for joining us. What was it, do you think, that Israel targeted there in Syria?
Well, what we've heard is that there were 2 targets. The first was this research and development center associated with the Syrian government, which has in the past been reportedly associated with Syria's chemical weapons program. The second is a weapons convoy, which, according to some reports, included advanced surface-to-air missiles. So, with regard to the R&D center, they were perhaps trying to prevent chemical weapons from falling into the hand of members of the opposition. Apparently, there had been fighting in the vicinity of this center in the last few days. With regard to the convoy, they wanted to prevent, apparently, the weapons in the convoy, perhaps these advanced surface-to-air missiles, from going to Hezbollah, which could be used in the event of a conflict between Israel and Syria in the future, or Israel and Hezbollah.
This Hezbollah theory, let's look at that a bit. I mean, these regional security officials suggesting that Assad is sending weapons to the group. How credible is that when Syria is fighting a huge war within its own borders?
It seems somewhat unlikely that at a time where the Syrians might need advanced surface-to-air missiles, they would be sending them to Hezbollah, unless they have an agreement with Hezbollah that Hezbollah, perhaps with Syrian operators, might set them up in the Bekaa Valley in order to make it more difficult for the Israelis to use the Bekaa as an approach either to the capital from the west via the air or to central Syria through the Bekaa. So it is possible you could spin out a scenario where it would make sense, given Syria's current concerns, that they would want to have advanced surface-to-air missiles in the Bekaa in order to prevent the Israelis from using these approaches to Syria if the Israelis want to launch further strikes in the future. Because the Assad government, the Assad regime is pretty paranoid, isn't it, that Israel is joining the rebels' fight to oust it from power? Well, I'm not sure that they've been saying from the very beginning that the rebels are supported by foreign forces, the forces of imperialism, which would include the United States and Israel. I think also, though, the Israelis have already warned the Syrians against transferring advanced weapons, advanced conventional weapons, or chemical weapons to Hezbollah. And they've also been worried that as a result of the fighting, some of these weapons would fall into the hands of terrorist groups. So part of what they were doing perhaps was preventive, to prevent these weapons from falling into the hands of terrorists or Hezbollah, and part to deterrence against the Syrian government to say that if you transfer these weapons, you have to face the possibility of a broader conflict with Israel at a time when you can't really afford a second war. No response from Israel yet to confirming or denying these airstrikes, or indeed what it might have been targeting. Should we expect to hear anything from the Israelis? Not necessarily. If you recall that they apparently struck a site in Sudan a few months ago, and there was no official response initially after that, nor did they respond after they bombed the Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007. So they've already made public warnings before the strikes, and that might be enough for them at this point.
Okay, Michael Eisenstadt, very good to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us.